It's Jim Paff, and welcome back to the Against Nice podcast, where we believe that nice people are the cruelest of all people because they're subjective and selfish in the way that they address society. Kind people have the interests of others in mind, but they speak truth into society. Follow us on iTunes, give us a 5-star rating, and also give us your review of the podcast. You can also follow us on Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and many other podcasting apps. Now let's get to the show. Very excited about this podcast today. I'm going to have my friend Leland Conway on. This is a really fun interview, just a lot of hard-hitting information, and just a lot of fun-loving good times as well. Leland I got to know when I was Chief of Staff for Congressman Thomas Massie from Kentucky. He was on WLAP in Lexington, Kentucky, and he was on WHAS in Louisville. Thomas would be on there regular. We found out we had both been on the radio and just got to be good friends with Thomas being on with him so regularly. He's at thedisruptionzone.com. That's his podcast. We'll probably trade off podcasts here as time goes on. We talk about that in the interview. But you can also find him at lelandconway.com. Leland has an excellent liberty constitutionalist voice that I think is really intriguing and fun, and I just strongly urge you to listen to what he does. You're going to get a good sense of the way he thinks through things. We talk a little bit about our experience on the radio and really hitting on some of the issues that are taking place right now and where we need to go. Plus, and you'll be really excited to hear this, and it'll be fun, he's got some basic things that are his agenda if he were to run for president this year. So without further ado, here's my interview with Leland Conway of the Disruption Zone podcast. Okay. Hey, really excited to have my friend Leland Conway on here.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah, you too, man.
Awesome.
So my background with you first, and then I want to get your background.
Sure.
So I've spent 8 years at Capitol Hills. Anyone that listens to the podcast knows. And 2 of those years, I got to work with Thomas Massie from Kentucky. And you were at the time on radio in Lexington and Louisville, Kentucky.
Yep.
So you're a fantastic libertarian like I am, constitutionalist, however you want to put it.
I like those words.
I do too. Yeah. They're all good.
Yep.
I wish we had a lot more of them.
Yeah, right.
And or a lot more people saying it and adhering to it. But so anyway, Thomas would be on your show quite a bit. You had a great following in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. Moving on to a podcast now, and I'm sure you'll be doing a lot of cool things, and hopefully we'll be doing some of that together in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's how I got to know you. And I introduced myself as a former radio guy. Spent 4 years in Denver, so we're kind of radio guys. I mean, that's what we do, which I love. I mean, I love radio. I love this podcast thing.
Yeah.
But had a lot of interesting things going on in Kentucky at the time. So Thomas, I think weekly was on your radio shows.
Almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of rarely not, I think.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's how we got to know one another. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself. I know you do have a podcast now.
Sure.
So tell what you have done and what's going on with you now.
Well, gosh, I started out in radio a long time ago, right in college. It was funny because I went to Asbury University in Wilmore.
Yeah.
And one of the things I learned as a freshman right away, I've never been a patient person. And one of the things I learned as a freshman right away was, I was told, get in there and do all the class projects. That's how you learn, right?
Yeah,
so I get in and I'm like, all these seniors are bossing us around. And I'm like, these guys don't know squat about the business. This isn't the business. So I was like, screw it. I'm not doing class projects. So I went knocking on every radio station's door in Lexington that I could and said, give me a broom. I'll sweep the floor. Just let me be in here. And one let me.
That's awesome.
So that's how I started in radio. And kind of just caught the bug, and I loved it ever since. I've done a little bit of TV, done some commentary for Fox News, done some audio and production for television and stuff like that. But really, I started out in the newsroom.
Yeah.
And so I guess you could say a little bit of a journalist at heart. And my heart breaks right now for the fact that journalism is completely dead in America.
It's crazy.
I spent several years doing play-by-play for Eastern Kentucky University, Georgetown College, and then ended up hosting the pre and post game show for UK.
Yeah.
And that led to my first talk show.
Yeah.
And once I got into that, I was like, whoa, this expressing your opinion thing kind of fits. So I did that for like 15 years, just doing just straight up talk show. And now, I'll be announcing some things in the very near future. I wish I could tell you today, but it's not quite ready yet about some of my next moves. But I can tell you that I'm still going to be involved in radio. And at least on a part-time basis, but I'm chasing some dreams right now, man. And I'm absolutely loving every bit of it.
It's what you and I have done. You've done a lot more of it, by the way. I think you're a bit more experienced than I am. By the way, you've got the standard radio voice. Okay. You really do have that. Do I?
I think we both do. I mean, I don't know what you mean by standard radio voice. Like, what is that? Like, I think you and I walk into a room, and if there's anybody in that room, they're going to know instantly that you or I have walked in the room.
Right.
And so I don't know if there's like a standard sound so much as there is it's a combination of voice and personality, right? And it's not that we necessarily want to kick everybody else out of the room. It's just that when we walk in, people tend to know we're there for whatever reason. And so I think that's what we have.
And when we're in the middle of talking, we're like, everyone tends to gravitate. They stop their conversations and then come over and get to this one. And
because we're so loud.
Yeah, I know, man.
Like, well, I'll just pay attention to the one I can hear.
That's right. I always have to adjust the volume on the end product. or equalize it.
My family would always be like, "Do your radio voice," and I'm like, "Right now?
Yeah.
Oh, any conversation I have?"
It's so true, man. It's funny. So. But you get into this, and the way I got into all this, it's really interesting. Two major things happened in my life that got me passionate about radio, other than getting into politics.
Right.
So I was in college at Indiana University, and there was this, and I started.
Forgive you for being a Hoosier, by the way.
Thank you. Well, we play better basketball than you Kentuckians.
No!
By the way, I would love.
Here comes the brawl.
I would love to do the Kentucky jokes. I have a. They're off track here, and I'll get back to my thing. This is my. The way I look at college basketball. And I love college basketball. Sure. I mean, people in Kentucky, I still
Kentucky, Indiana, North Carolina, it's all there is.
That's right. Yeah. So, and I think it's fair to say Indiana kind of is the world home of basketball, but Kentucky and North Carolina are close seconds in my mind. You may disagree, but I'm just.
Oh, we're going to claim it, but that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
Having, like, those three states are all going to tell each other they're the home of it. And that's what makes being those three states as opposed to anybody else as a poser.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So this is my theory on college basketball, the history of college basketball since the 1940s. When the NCAA tournament became the dominant tournament, it was the NIT before that, but the NCAA put together a tournament. There are only 4 teams that are the heart of college basketball. Yeah. It's Indiana, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Kansas, period. Yeah. Because every one of those teams, they've had their down decades, but every decade since the 1940s, those are the 4 teams you always look to.
Right.
It's been my theory for a long time.
Yeah, and there'll be some people that'll try to interject Duke in there, but Duke doesn't win championships.
Well,
they go to the tournament every year, but that's not the same. And they're always like in the top 5, and then they fizzle every year. They exit early. Of course, Kansas has that problem too right now, but
they do, well, but we all have in various decades.
The
thing is, Duke's only done that within the last 3 decades.
Right, exactly.
And
not all the way back to the 40s. And,
that's exactly right.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And they are today the San Francisco of the 1950s.
Yeah.
San Francisco had that too. Wilt Chamberlain played. I think it was Wilt Chamberlain played at San Francisco, and they won some championships in the 50s. So no, these 4 teams are always in the game somewhere. Yep. I mean, they're making the tournaments. They're rarely not making the tournaments.
Right.
And they don't always do great in the tournaments, but they've all won championships.
Yep.
Through that time. UCLA is another one that people say, oh, you got to put UCLA. No, John Wooden era. Yeah. And then a brief time in the 90s. Yeah. And that's really about it.
Yeah. That's not enough to call it a dynasty.
Right.
It was a dynasty period. Versus, like you said, always Kentucky, Kansas, North Carolina, Indiana, always in the mix. And when they're not in the mix, something's wrong
right.
in college basketball when Indiana wasn't doing so well a few years back.
Right.
It was like, they're going through fits and starts trying to find a great coach because something's wrong in the world of basketball when it's not.
It drives everybody nuts. If the 4 of these teams don't show up in the tournament, people are like, what's going on here? That's really weird. No, seriously. So even though I'll take Kentucky has more championships than IU,
right, sure.
but I'll take IU over Kentucky anytime. You have to respect Kentucky basketball. I was in North Carolina with my uncle one time. Got on the golf course, and I had some IU socks on.
Oh no!
And this guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, what are you doing there?" And I had to say, "Hey, I love Dean Smith. I just got to tell you, I have great respect for Dean Smith." Yeah, you got to be. So
when in Rome.
So anyway, it's that I love basketball.
Yeah,
I hate NBA basketball, but I love college basketball, and we might be able to get into that a little bit. But so back to how I got into radio. In college, I went to Indiana and Bloomington, and then I finished at IUPUI in Indianapolis. When I was in Indianapolis, I found out about this thing called Siri Radio Reading, Central Indiana Radio Reading.
Okay.
And they just, back then, no internet, hard to get audio of anything, definitely of newspapers. So I would read the newspapers and books, record that, and then they would play it out on this special broadcast channel.
Okay.
To blind folks.
Blind folks, yeah.
So it got my diction it really worked. I got to work on my diction, and I'm not perfect at it, even on the radio right now, but I do fits and starts. But it taught me a lot about that. The next thing that happened was that my passion for politics, and in college, getting involved on campus as well. Rush Limbaugh's coming out. Right. Just shortly after that. And then when I I came out in 1989. So he had started about 88. And then the 1990s, I would totally pay attention to what he was doing.
Right.
I mean, I didn't just listen to the show because I was interested in the content.
Yeah.
I was paying attention. How does he come in and out of breaks?
Oh yeah.
How does he choose his topics? Kind of get a sense of that. How does he do? Where does he throw in the comedic stuff in the middle of it?
Yeah.
Different things like that. I paid deep attention to it. And so I got involved in campaigns. I'm writing commercials, radio commercials, and I'm thinking through how to compose that, all this stuff. And I just was like, man, if I ever got a chance. So a friend of mine who's a left-wing comedian from Indianapolis who wrote for Bob and Tom, that Bob and Tom program.
Yeah.
And we've remained good friends to this day. He's a really great guy. But he had a radio show in Indianapolis, and everyone went on with pseudonyms when they would call in, and I went in with a pseudonym.
That's awesome.
And he loved the people that were there, no matter their political affiliation. He let me in studio a few times with some other people with pseudonyms.
Right.
The bug hit me, and I just wanted to do it. So when I got opportunities to do it in Colorado, I was already hooked, totally stuck, and it was hard being in DC and not being able to be on radio. I loved it. Yeah. So that's why I think
the most challenging thing because it's so funny is everybody thinks they can do a talk radio show.
Right.
And I think the most challenging thing about it is what people want and what people gravitate to is authenticity.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first started, I worry, and especially on the journalism side of it.
Yeah.
Diction, grammar, all that stuff it was very important.
Yeah.
But as I got into talk radio, I really began to create my own style, which was just conversational.
Yeah.
To the point that grammar didn't really matter to me. Even, you have to project, and you have to enunciate so that people understand. But there also has to be an element of being a normal person, having a normal conversation with other normal people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that sort of authenticity, I think, is what anchors a host to an audience.
Yeah.
Is they have to get in their car and feel like, I need to hear what that person has to say, because that person is speaking for me. He's speaking like me. You know what I mean? And I think that's a hard thing for hosts sometimes to catch.
Yeah.
Is that ability to just be a normal person and react to things the way a normal person does. And when you do that, there's just something that connects you to the audience, because again, there's a I have this concept of leadership that I refer to as advocate leadership. And there's a difference between being an advocate and a crusader, right? When you see talk show hosts go out in flames, generally what happened is they became a crusader.
Yeah.
They were no longer an advocate. The crusader is, I have this one issue that's so important to me. You must listen to me on it. And you must believe what I have to say about it. And then they get caught in this little tunnel. And there's a small group that's very loyal to them because they buy into that crusade.
Yeah, true.
But the rest of the people are like, you're not talking for me anymore because I really don't care about the price of toilet paper in Mexico. Right. But an advocate is finding those buttons that everyone is out there pushing and tapping into those and then fighting for those. And that's like a fine line.
That's a difficult balance too, because you want it to be consistent with what you're passionate about as well. It has
to be authentic. If it's not authentic, you're screwed.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And if you're on there telling people you believe something that you don't believe, because I've had people ask me that before. They're like, do you really believe what you say? I'm like, I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. Like, do I hyperbolize? Yes. Do I exaggerate? Yes. Do I add things for entertainment value? Do I embellish stories sometimes? Sure.
Yeah.
But I really believe what I say. If I'm not on principle, man, you're going to know it.
Yeah,
Exactly. People are smart. People are way smarter than a lot of people give credit for.
Well, in fact, I'm totally convinced that the American electorate, they're slow to respond.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because they're living their lives.
Right.
Once they get a chance to take in the information, then they're on it.
Yeah.
And they make the changes. If Republicans are being idiots, they kick them out.
Right.
If Democrats are being idiots, they kick them out. And it's happened both ways.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the great things about this medium is that it gives you an opportunity to help people bring their own context into it. And that's why I like what you say about advocating.
Right.
Because even though it's your passion, you're advocating for them,
right,
not for yourself.
Right.
And what's interesting is it's kind of like marriage in a way. It's like if you love on your spouse, if a husband loves on his wife, or a wife respects her husband, and they both are putting that effort into it, that is totally selfless, it all works great. Yeah. In the end. If you don't, it messes everything up.
Yeah. I think there's a lesson in getting along with people in that. Like if I meet some random person on the street, there's something that they believe that they're passionate about that I'm also passionate about and I believe in. No matter what our politics are, no matter what our background is, no matter what our race is, when you look at people and say, we're going to find whatever that common ground is and we can advocate for each other on that.
Yeah.
There's a lesson in getting along because, there's a lot of things I'm passionate about and I believe in I never talked about on the radio, right? Mm-hmm. Because I knew that wasn't going to connect with the audience.
Right.
So that doesn't mean I'm not being authentic and I'm not following my principles. It just means what I'm going to do is I'm going to find where I do connect with this group and I'm going to hit that.
Yeah.
Because that's how you get along with people.
Yeah.
And if you walk into a room full of liberals, there's still something there. Yeah. I got the Fur Baby Award or whatever it was in Louisville one year from the Humane Society for helping to get Romeo's Law passed in Kentucky, which was the first law to make it a felony to torture a dog or a cat. And I remember Governor Beshear, the original, had a signing ceremony that I was invited to, and they brought in Romeo, which the law's named after Romeo. He's a white lab that was caught on tape by a neighbor just being viciously tormented by his owner. He survived it, found a new home. We brought Romeo in, and he signed the legislation. It's probably the only legislation in America that's signed by a dog paw. But again, here's me standing there with Governor Beshear. We're talking UK basketball and puppies.
Right.
We disagree on everything else.
Yeah.
But in that moment, the Humane Society giving a conservative talk show host an award for animal advocacy. Look, we connected on that, So there's I don't know. There's a lesson in that in how we can all get along because there's something we're all going to advocate for that we agree with.
I think that's why, by the way, a lot of people from any political perspective, like Joe Rogan, he connects to all those people from different sides. He's really interested in what they have to say,
right,
and listening to it. Doesn't always agree. You have him. I just recently had Peter Schiff on.
Yeah, I heard that. I heard that episode.
And then he had Oliver Stone on.
That Peter Schiff episode scared the crap out of me. I was like,
Yeah.
I go home and I'm like, honey, buy gold.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm just like, buy gold now.
By the way, it scares the crap out of you as a podcaster too.
Sure.
Because he kept he was doing it remotely, talking over Joe. And it's like, Joe's like, wait a minute, Peter.
Yeah. I kept going, shut up, Peter, but still, I was still enthralled.
Yeah. And he was interested too. But
Stone episode was also.
It was an excellent interview. But see, that's the thing. You can have, these are two guys that are on entirely different aspects of the political spectrum. By the way, they probably meet on the civil libertarian aspect of things. Yeah. But they're so different politically, and yet it's engaged. That's I'm trying to do that always on this podcast, and I just think that people are, and this is why, who'd have thought podcasting would be so big? I mean, it's shortly going to supplant on-air radio.
I agree.
And
absolutely agree.
And it's convenient. You don't have to figure out that, I got to get in the car, when so-and-so's on, or turn on the radio. It's right there for you. And then it's accessible with it's got a lot of different kinds of information because people are doing a lot of different types of things. And so I think that's really critical. It's going to be useful for society, but doing this the right way is going to help people really re-engage with what's going on around them. And it's why I wanted to get into it. I know you're seeing the results of it too.
I think what's interesting about podcast, I agree with you that it's going to supplant terrestrial radio. And in fact, you could notice that the leading radio companies are really emphasizing podcasts. Yeah. My former company, iHeart, was very smart in this. My podcast is on the iHeartRadio app.
By the way, mine is too.
Sweet.
Yes,
you got in there.
Yes.
But they are the number one distributor of podcasts.
And what's really interesting about that is their app is really crappy.
Right.
It sucks.
but
people are using it.
But I like the fact that it delivers those episodes directly to you. But here's the difference, right? Yeah. I spent the last 15 years of my life literally bound to the idea of, are we getting thousands of listeners or not, right? Like massive numbers of people. Now, at the podcast thing, it's very different. I mean, you do want big numbers, but nobody's going to be Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan with his tens of millions.
Adam Carolla.
Or Adam Carolla with their tens of millions of audience a week. Those guys were literally in this at the very beginning, and they've been slogging away. But what the future is, it's going to be a lot more segmented. And it's going to be a lot more, I think, listener-driven, because people now, instead of going, what do I have to listen to between 9 and noon? Oh, it's this show, or that show.
Right.
Now it's, what do I want to listen to while I'm driving to such and such for an hour and 15 minutes?
Yeah.
And it's what they're interested in getting downloaded directly to their phone.
Yeah.
And if you're not in that zone, they're not going to download you.
That's exactly right.
So it's a totally different ball game. And like you said, you have to do it in a way that is compelling to people. And instead of just, getting on a microphone and just assuming that tens of thousands are going to tune you in because you're the only option. It's basically streaming, right? Yeah. What we used to have, ABC, NBC, CBS.
Yeah.
And now, like, what was it I was listening, speaking of Joe Rogan, there was, who did he have on the other day that was talking about, it was Rob Lowe. He was talking about his first TV show.
I heard that.
Yeah, and he was like, we were 98th or whatever it was in the ratings, which was dead last, and we had 16 million viewers.
Yeah.
CNN's lucky if they pull 500,000 today.
That's correct.
Partly because they suck, but partly because there's so many other options.
Yeah, no, I remember Rob mentioning that because I listened to that podcast too. It blew Joe Rogan's mind.
Right.
I mean, think about that for a minute. So now we're in an entirely different place. Where and to be candid, it's more efficient. I find it more efficient all the different channels on cable television, for example.
Right.
It's efficient for me because if I'm really interested in science, so I'll pull up the science channel when I want to. Sure. And I know there are a bunch of people that aren't there, but it's a good combination because they not only have to do the science, they have to make it approachable for everybody.
Yeah.
So their numbers actually on cable TV are pretty high,
right,
for today's type numbers, but because they cast that net that way. So it's a real interesting combination. It's niche, but accessibility.
Yeah, and I think if you're having a compelling discussion, like the greatest compliment people used to give me is they would say, dude, I was in my garage and I sat there for 10 minutes because I had to hear the end of what you were saying, right? That's live radio.
Yeah, yeah.
Now you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
I literally will listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, and when I get in the car, I get to the house, I just turn it off.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to pick up right where that conversation
Exactly.
left off, so I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
When I get back in the car in an hour and a half, I'll hear the rest of it.
Yeah.
You know, so that on demand is what it is. But if it's compelling content, it has to be compelling.
It really does.
Yep.
So getting down in the dirty then, and where we're at, because we've got really major struggles taking place in this country right now.
Yep.
Which also, I mean, just thinking about the podcast thing, it makes this is one of the reasons, COVID, being home, and the way that events are transpiring is one of the big reasons why podcasts are going to change. It's kind of like brick and mortar is changing now.
Yeah.
After COVID, there'll be some brick and mortar there. I mean, Walmart's going to be around, Target is, some of these, but people are going to buy online. I mean, the growth is been crazy. Yeah. Well, that's going to happen with podcasts too. So we're in a place right now where the debate in this country is radically different, I think, than just about any time in American history. Now, we've had times in our history where it got intense and people were grappling with them, even sometimes violent, to be candid. I mean, people think this is the first
1920s,
time.
anarchists bombing places.
Yeah, go back to the Andrew Jackson era.
Yeah.
The Civil War era.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've seen this sort of thing happen, but it is a little bit different because we're talking about a radically different set of ideas that are coming to the fore, or at least getting attention.
Yeah.
Where are we at right now? What do you see in this COVID / BLM Antifa era? Where do you see us going right now? What are you observing, and what are people giving you in feedback as you're putting your message out there?
I'm actually I'm deeply concerned because I think that this is different.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll tell you why I think it's different. For lack of a better way of framing this, I'll just say Twitter. You look at Twitter, and about 90% of the activity, 22% of the American people are on the Twitter platform, 22%.
Mm-hmm.
Of that 22%, 90% of them never say a word. The other 10% basically drive all of that conversation. And you might say, well, that means they're insignificant then. But they're not. Why? Because in the media, 90% of the people in the media are left-wing. Those people that are driving the Twitter conversation are left-wing. Twitter gives the media a convenient way of framing a news story falsely. So in other words, when media goes on and they say on 10 o'clock news, on Twitter today, right?
Yeah.
And then they frame an entire story. And when they frame it that way, they frame it as if this is the entire nation's thinking about this person. So when somebody gets destroyed on Twitter, it's because everybody hates them.
Yeah.
Everybody disagrees with what they said. Somebody says something controversial, does something controversial, it's Twitter. Here's what's happening that's dangerous. There's an entire different America. We saw this emerging in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, it was the polls. They were wrong. There was a hidden population that was silent, but they were the majority. Well, they weren't the overall majority, but they were the majority in key states.
Yeah.
Right? There was this massive population that was completely unaccounted for. That still exists, and that lesson hasn't been learned. There are a lot of people I've seen. The best way to sort of capsulize this is the people will sometimes say, wait till the ones who just want to be left alone get involved.
Yeah.
That is a huge segment of the population that
is.
Just wants to be left alone. And so it's not accounted for, but it exists. So what I see is a sort of schism developing, right? You have the Twitterati, and they're driving the conversation. They're setting the rules for conversation. Can't say this, can't say that. This can't do that. But there's this other population of people who've been living their lives a certain way for their entire life, and suddenly they're being given a whole new set of rules, and they're going, who are you to tell me that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
That schism, I think, is dangerous because I don't know what's going to happen in the election. There's a lot of upheaval. There's a lot of question about the whole mail-in balloting and all that kind of stuff, which normally I'm not against mail-in balloting, and some states can do it. Some states can't. We're not prepared to do a federal election that way. There's going to be chaos. And I see this sort of huge schism developing. I think the vast majority of people disagree with burning, looting, rioting. But I think there's a large chunk of the American population that leans left in their thinking and therefore is afraid of the small percentage of their political body that is driving that violence, looting, and all those things. And I want to be careful to distinguish. There's two different things here. The original idea behind the protests, I'm on board with. But I think so is everyone else in America. Reform is coming.
Right.
That is going to happen. And so we best be prepared to be at the table talking about how we want that reform to look. But it's going to happen. The conversation that needs to happen is going to happen. But what's driving what's happening now in cities is not in any way tied to that reform. It's not tied to that agenda. It's tied to something else entirely. And we have a major political party in America that is so afraid of that small fraction of their party, which is driving this Marxist ideology, that they're doing their bidding.
Yeah.
And that to me is terrifying because, again, we go back to the other population I told you about that ain't about to take any Marxism.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And that clash is coming because if that one particular party controls the country after November 3rd and starts allowing that small percentage of its population within that group of political thinkers to set the rules for everybody else, that's going to be a recipe for chaos.
Does that
make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense. I believe that, so to speak, Donald Trump is going to not only win the popular vote, I think he's going to have an electoral mandate. I mean, that's what's setting up. Just the political prognosticator. Sure. I am constantly having to look at polls, running campaigns.
Right.
That's what my spidey sense tells me right now. But I will say this, the most interesting factor on this, and it'll play out in how people react to the end result.
Yeah.
The people you're describing, is that this mail ballot thing, I mean, we're typically done with the election on election day.
Right. We're not.
And I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, we're not going to know for maybe lucky by December 1st.
Now, I remember back in the day when Al Franken ran against Norm Coleman up in Minnesota.
Yes.
And Norm Coleman had it won the night of the election. Narrow.
Right.
But he had it won. And then Shazam, 3,500 ballots pop up in someone's trunk.
Right.
I mean, that was the actual story.
Right.
Stuff like that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. On both sides, probably.
Possibly. Listen, yeah. I know specifically of certain instances where I'm not going to say who, but previous presidential campaigns on the Republican side have actually done illegal stuff to get that. But I find I'm more concerned because Democrats are actually trying to institutionalize it. So California's lost right now for Republicans. But the reason it's lost is because of the way that they've changed voting there. Mm-hmm. You have vote gathering is entirely legal.
Right.
And there were just reports on some of these recent problems that have happened with mail-in voting where, in fact, there was an article recently where an anonymous person was talking with a reporter over in New Jersey and said, listen, what we do is we gather up the votes. We make a copy of the ballot. Yeah, this was actually reported. And they over Steam, I mean, like your grandma did when she was wanting to see what your letter said.
Yeah.
Over Steam, the outside of the ballot that's signed, they're steaming it up, opening the ballot, pulling out the old one and putting the new one in. This has been happening. This was just recently reported in the Northeast. If anything like that happens, and by the way, you can't do that on a massive scale, but you can do it on enough of a scale to turn things.
You can do it in areas where you're talking about a razor's edge election, and we're talking about states where one precinct could decide.
Except in California.
Where
it can be done on a mass scale.
Right.
So they organize volunteers to go door to door, and they're probably going to gather up tens of thousands of ballots.
But let's take a state like Minnesota or Wisconsin, where really this presidential election once again could come down to that, where Trump successfully eroded the blue wall, so to speak, in the Midwest.
Right.
He connects with those voters in a way that no Republican has been able to connect, which we can talk about that later, because I think there's a major opportunity for Republicans, regardless who wins this election, but I doubt they'll accept it.
Yeah.
But he connects with those people on a level that is significant, but there are going to be 2 or 3 precincts in each of those states that could potentially determine the outcome of those states, and as such, potentially determine the outcome of the presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you can't do it on a mass scale, that's what Obama meant when he said you can't steal an American election. Well, you can, because JFK did it.
Yeah.
You know, you had a couple of precincts in Chicago that made the difference in the entire election.
By the way, West Virginia too.
And West Virginia.
And
yeah, I
Southern
forgot
West
about that. West
Virginia,
Virginia. But those 2 states, insignificant in any other election, because Illinois always goes a certain way and West Virginia is going to go a certain way. But as that map shifts, 2 or 3 precincts, you get in there and do something in those, and yeah, you can steal an election.
Yeah.
You know, that's how, but that's when you're talking about razor thin. But maybe we can talk about that for a minute. Like, why is it razor thin? Why is it so one side or this side?
Right.
And I think that that's the other problem that we have in America. And I think Republicans have contributed to this just as much as Democrats have.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that both parties exist purely for the sole purpose of opposing the other one.
Yeah.
And that's it.
No, that's right.
And when you look at, I posted on Facebook the other day a joking, I'm going to run for president. But the 9 points that I put in there, minus the 9th one, I was serious about those things. That's truly how I feel about how the country ought to be run.
Yeah.
I would beg to guess, especially based on the reaction to that 60, 70, 80% of the American population could probably get on board with 7 out of 9 of those.
Yeah.
Meaning that if a political party spoke like that, they'd win in a landslide. It wouldn't be a razor's edge election.
No, you're right. And by the way, in all the 8 years that I spent on Capitol Hill, I was chief of staff for Thomas Massey and for Tim Huelskamp.
Mm-hmm.
In all that time, the greatest threats to each of those men politically were Republicans, not Democrats.
Yeah.
Now, if the Republican Party actually voted for and stood by its platform, which I don't find perfect,
right?
But it's pretty. I think that they would totally
win every election.
Every election.
Yeah. If they would back off some of the social issues and focus, but that's the problem is
now. By the way, the abortion issue really is coming back because of the way Trump has done.
I don't consider abortion a social issue.
Okay, so what do you mean by social issues then?
I mean, I would like to see Republicans advocate stronger for things like criminal justice reform.
Yes, absolutely.
Opportunity zones, because you have to recognize that it was less than a lifetime ago that some of our fellow Americans couldn't drink from the same water fountain.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's everything about fixing those injustices cries out to the Republican platform of freedom, liberty, and letting everybody have an equal shot. And there's some things we can do that are free market based.
Yeah.
That will allow folks that have been caught up in that cycle to break those cycles. And I think Republicans should be first. I think the best example of that is Rand Paul.
Yeah.
I was so disgusting the other night when he was in DC and getting attacked and they were chanting, say her name. And I'm like, this is the freaking author of the bill that names her name.
That's right.
Right. Right. But that's not a political ploy for him.
Yeah.
He's been consistent.
Oh, absolutely.
One of the first places he visited when he became U.S. Senator was the West End of Louisville.
Yeah.
And he started out with the idea of opportunity zones, which are not necessarily based on race, but they're based on economic depressed areas. And these are free market ideas to generate wealth in those areas, right?
This was the Jack Kemp idea,
absolutely.
and it's why the black community loved Jack Kemp, because he saw this problem and what it was, and he knew it wasn't limited to black folks. It was an inner city problem, and to be candid, a Democrat problem, or at least a local Democrat problem, because most of these cities have been run by Democrats, and they take away opportunity through taxes and regulations and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. The last thing I can ever purport to do is speak for a group of people. But I have a feeling that various minority groups in America are not Marxists. I grew up in the Southwest, so I grew up around a lot of Hispanic people and in that culture. And I didn't know very many Marxists.
No.
I knew people that wanted a fair shot.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted a seat at the table. They wanted to play in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And if Republicans were more, I don't understand. Like I loved most of the Republican convention.
Yeah.
You had speakers, you had African-American speakers up there talking about freedom and liberty. And you saw there was a coinciding bump in the polls for Trump.
No doubt.
In the black vote. But you know what would have literally avoided this entire summer is if right after the George Floyd incident broke, if President Trump had gone to Minneapolis, and stood there and said, we're going to fix this. You know what I mean? It's like you would have never had the whole defund police bullcrap because it wouldn't have gotten any kind of traction at all. I actually think Trump could have sold up the election on that day if he had gone and said, I'm going to go visit here. This is a serious issue. And we as Republicans take this as a serious issue. We are for the police. We support police, but we recognize there needs to be some reform. And we recognize what this looks like from your perspective.
And by the way, I know that you and I, we have a strong civil libertarian part of us.
Yeah.
That some various friends of ours, Young Americans for Liberty, I'm on the National Advisory Board for that organization. Matt Kibbe over at Free the People.
Yeah.
And some other organizations. I had Matt on my podcast recently. This is an area that which proves your point in my opinion, but this is an area where these are groups that are gaining huge traction in their various constituencies that I think a lot of Republicans had no idea. Rand Paul is going to be a leader in the future. Thomas Massey as well. From the Republican perspective, with groups that we would have never thought before.
Yeah.
Because this really is passionate for a lot of people. I had my friend Ken Johnson, former chaplain of the Indianapolis Colts, big dude. He and I never talk black, white, and he's black and I'm white.
Yeah.
And then when stuff like this comes up, we said it on the podcast. We got to talk. We hate talking race because we don't even think about race.
Right.
But he deals with things that happen to him.
Yeah.
I've got other friends of mine that they deal with this. And people intuitively know that this is a problem, not because the police forces are racist, but because of just mostly ignorance and very small, thin line of racism that might actually exist. But people know this in society and it resonates.
Right.
And Republicans have missed that opportunity. But the biggest reason that they missed the opportunity, it's kind of Newt Gingrich's fault because we've gone to the lobbyists to fill all the gaps.
Right.
I see this in campaigns. You go NRCC or Republican National Committee, National Republican Campaign Committee, or with the House or Republican National Committee, they have their incestuous relationships with just a few vendors who do political things who are not in the least about winning elections or getting to a message that matters. They're entirely about getting the media buys and getting all the other stuff.
Yeah.
And the Republican Party has failed because there's a real incestuous core at the leadership that turns off the American people.
Yeah. And there's an attitude of, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And that's what we're here to provide. Right. While the American people see that the little guy gets crushed by cronyism, which cronyism was created by both parties.
Yes.
It's not an exclusive domain of Republicanism.
No.
It's not an exclusive domain of Democrats. It was created and it's allowed to flourish under both parties because that is what the elites do to eat at the trough. And the average American steps back. I contend that Americans' political views are so much more nuanced than red and blue, even my own. Right?
Yeah.
Like, am I on the red team? I'm on the if you were to say what party do you belong to, Leland, I would say I belong to the don't tread on me party.
Yeah.
Don't get in my way and I won't get in yours. And here, let me help you achieve your dreams.
All right.
That's pretty much it, man. If we have that commonality, we're gonna walk in lockstep.
Yeah.
I want to see people get left alone.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I want people to be able to do and if they need help, let's all help. But I mean, I that's the party that I belong to. But when you start breaking down political views, it's so much more nuanced. Like, let's take immigration for a second. This is kind of what I mean by social issues too. Because when you asked about abortion's not a social issue for me because it's a life issue.
Yeah.
Now, is there wiggle room and debate area? Sure. But life is life. Okay. So I don't see that as a social issue. I know it's owned by the social issue mantle. But when I say social issue, I say this, like, I have several friends in the homosexual community.
Mm-hmm.
All of them are conservative when it comes to fiscal stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Republicans aren't really banging the anti-gay marriage drum anymore because that's kind of moved on.
Right.
But there's also not this wide open arms like, come in, be a part of our family.
Yeah.
We don't care who you choose to love. We just care that we're all in this for liberty. Right?
Right.
There's not an embracing of that.
Yep.
There should be an embracing of that. And to the point then, in terms of social issues, I think criminal justice is a social issue.
Yeah.
And too often conservatives have said, throw them all in jail. They commit a crime, do the time. There's a whole lot of nuanced ways we can deal with that. So a perfect example is immigration.
Yeah.
Okay. I grew up on the border with Mexico. My dad's had several run-ins with the cartels, dangerous ones.
Yeah.
Okay. Still faces them as a 76-year-old man. I worry about him every day. He's 20 miles from the Mexican border.
And by the way, just to clarify, hold that thought for a moment, but I lived in the Phoenix area for a little while. You lived really close to the Arizona border
20 miles.
when you grew up.
Yep.
In Globe, Arizona, I lived way out in East Mesa. In Globe, Arizona, every night I knew people in that area, and there were illegals running up their fields. That's a kind of a rural area of the Phoenix area. I mean, every night it's happening. That is more like 100 miles from the border. That's how bad that is.
Well, they're trying to get to Phoenix,
right?
Because that's where they can get picked up and they can then get dispersed throughout the rest of the country.
Correct.
When I was a kid, there's a wash behind my house, a dry wash. It's like a dry creek bed.
Mm-hmm.
My best friend and I would sit up on the apex of the roof of our house and watch them come up the wash. My mom kept an igloo cooler full of water on the front porch, and they would come and get water because they were coming out of the desert.
Yep.
Totally dry, totally parched. She'd fix them sandwiches and then call Border Patrol because she's an old Kentucky girl who doesn't want anybody to go home on an empty stomach, right?
Yeah.
She would care for them and then call law enforcement. But at that time when I was growing up, it was purely people coming up here to work.
Right.
But this issue is nuanced in the sense that I am for secure borders. I'm for building a fence and a wall where it makes sense. I'm also for a virtual wall. But I'm also for a humane solution to people who have come here, had children here, whose children have grown up here, don't even speak the language of the place their parents came from, and then no one in their family has committed any further crime beyond coming in here.
Right.
If you're willing to pledge allegiance to the United States, learn how to speak English so you can prosper, not because we're prejudiced, but so you can prosper, because that's the business language, and pay maybe a small fine for having come here illegally, then let's fast track your citizenship. Now, saying both of those things at the same time is incongruent with the major discussion in America. To say I'm for secure borders and a humane solution for immigration. Because I, as a libertarian, I don't subscribe to the, I think, archaic and frankly, somewhat racist idea that every immigrant that comes here steals a job from an American.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
They do not.
Right.
If you come here and you're innovative, the economy is not, freedom is not a finite pie. There is not only a set amount of freedom that only certain people can have.
Yeah.
So if you've been vetted and you are clearly interested in following your American dream and you want to be a part of this awesome experiment, fast track that. I have a friend whose wife is in Brazil. They've been married 4 years. He can't get her into the United States. She's a nurse. Who says we couldn't use a nurse?
Yeah, exactly.
She's highly educated. She does not need government assistance to get by, right? So fast track that. But I will be accused of being an open borders liberal for saying that. Or when I said, let's build a wall, I'm going to be accused of being a racist. Right. But almost every single American lives where I live. So that's my point. It's like, it's nuanced, right?
And listen, it doesn't have to be a path to citizenship either. One of the things that we did when I worked for Tim Hill's camp, and he had the western 2/3 of Kansas at the time, big time farm community, but a lot of cattle.
Right.
In fact, the number of cattle on the ground and produced in processing plants, Kansas is the biggest cattle state.
Right.
Texas has more on the ground. But anyway, there are a lot of really well-trained people in Mexico and Central America that are capable of working with this cattle. And they can only come up on current green card status in a 9-month window.
Right.
And then they got to go back, which kills the cattle industry. I mean, it's great for California and all the produce industry they got there, but it's horrible for people in Kansas. You could have really trained people, and they don't have to become citizens. Not all of them necessarily feel like that they have.
Americans work in Great Britain.
That's right.
They work in Canada.
And they want to send money back home to their families so that they can survive and they find a better opportunity here. So there are ways we can do that too. I'm more on the green card status end of what you're saying. I think the path to citizenship thing should be a higher barrier and it should be purposeful. But we're shutting off green cards, H-1B visas, all this stuff all the time.
There's a lot of people who are not terrorists.
Yes.
Who could come here and contribute to our economy in one way or another. And it's not going to steal a damn thing for many Americans.
Well, and I'm 100% with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think the real critical issue is voting.
Right.
That's where this becomes a real problem.
Right.
Because many states are trying to allow non-citizens to vote.
Right.
And that is where the line has to be bright and clear, and
Yeah.
the wall on that line should be very firm legally.
Right. But see, that again, I'm with you. We're talking about nuance.
Right.
Right. Immigration isn't just shut it all down
Right.
or open it all up.
Right.
It's not, and it's not about being somebody who rides the fence in the middle. That's not it. It's just that within what we've done in America, I think, and I blame the media for this largely, and the parties, is trying to, we oversimplify everything, and we lump too much into big categories. The idea of immigration is not one issue. It's 1,000 issues.
Right.
It's the voting security issue. It's the families that have been here issue. It's the green card issue. It's the terrorism issue. It's the criminal issue, the drug issue. It's all of those different issues. So you can't possibly lump your opinion on immigration reform into one element, a wall or not a wall.
Yeah.
That's absurd.
Yeah.
And everybody intuitively knows this. And yet, for whatever reason, especially with social media, we still default to those red and blue camps.
Right.
Why do we do that?
Well, and where Republicans make real mistakes on this whole social issue thing as you're framing it is because of the window up, window down aspect of it.
Right.
It's like everyone knows it's compassionate criminal justice reform. Everyone knows it's compassionate. I mean, truly compassionate.
Right.
I'm not saying it from the Democrat idea of compassionate because everything's about the children type stuff.
Right.
I'm talking about real compassion. Everyone knows it's compassionate and humane to try to think through the nuances of this issue. But the problem with Republicans often, I think Democrats too, but certainly Republicans, is that they run away from things because they see it as a binary issue, and they don't understand the nuance.
But the binary issue, that's what gets you canceled.
Yeah.
And that's why everybody runs away from it. Right? I mean, okay, like here's a perfect example. I can say I am for criminal justice reform, but in California, a prosecutor just said we have to take the needs of the rioters and looters into concern before we decide whether or not to prosecute them. That's bullcrap.
Yeah.
Right? That's not criminal justice reform.
No.
That's letting people get away with crimes that are destroying people's lives.
Where on the other end of it, you've got people that have small possession of drugs.
Right.
That, we can discuss the moral issue. That's fine.
Yeah.
We've got a rule of law issue here.
Right.
So we're throwing people that have a couple joints into prison for 2 years where they become part of that system. And we're not understanding what effect that has. Republicans hate this statistic, but we really do incarcerate more people on a per capita basis. I mean, by far, there's not a country that's close. Yes.
I mean,
seriously. Now, when they get in, we treat them much better than they do in China.
Yeah.
And that is an important fact.
Right.
But seriously, let's just understand here.
Yeah.
We've got to entirely stop how we are approaching this thing. But that's a huge issue right now.
Yeah.
We can't. Republicans have got to deal with this because it's real to people.
Yeah, I think, because how many people have somebody in their family that's been on meth? Right. And you go, do you want that person to have a permanent felony record?
Right.
Or do you want that person to get the rehab they need so they can go back to being a productive citizen?
Yeah.
Now, if they have a permanent felony record, they're going to cost us a lot more money over time, because first we're going to have to incarcerate them for however long that's going to be. And then we're going to have to prop them up with government assistance because they can't find a job.
Yeah.
Versus if I get you the rehab you need and I spend $20,000 up front instead of $150,000 over the course of your lifetime, that's a win for taxpayers. That's a free market, conservative, small government win for taxpayers. But Republicans won't touch that with a 10-foot pole because that means we're redistributing money. No, we're not. We're fixing a problem the way it needs to be fixed. We're dealing with an issue.
Yeah.
And it's like, whether we like it or not, this problem exists, and you can't just let people die on the streets like that.
And there's some dichotomy between Republicans and Democrats on these social issues like you're talking about. There's one area of policy where there's no dichotomy at all. They're almost running neck and neck. They're the uniparty.
Yeah.
And that's economic issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
100%.
They spend now there's some nuance to the little things that they differentiate on but very little of that.
I heard somebody say the other day, I was like, really economically, the difference between Republicans and Democrats is, do you want a top income tax rate of 39.6 or 36?
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, that's a pretty good point.
No, that's right. And now, where they do differ, which is on social programs and the military, for example, the big spending issues, and those are two of the biggest. They have a different, almost radically different approach. But the thing is, so the bills will pass. The Republicans, when they're in control, give all the social programs to the Democrats, and the Democrats, when they're in control, give all the military spending. Right. And by the way, and we're going to get into your kind of some of your proposals here, but we're both for a massively strong military.
Yeah.
I do, like you, want to bring us in from all this. Is one of the things I love about Trump, is bring us in from all these engagements all over the world with ground troops.
Yeah.
I am for some massive carrier groups, because that helps us to quick deploy to certain things.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? You realize what Trump's done here, and this is an area I have a lot of praise for him in, is his foreign policy.
Yeah.
He has brought the troops home without ending the projection of power.
Right.
And this is where I differ with my libertarian friends on foreign policy a little bit.
Yeah.
And that is that the projection of power that America does around the world acts as a basically cost-free police aspect to the world. I hate to say that, because we don't like to say we're the world's police, right?
Yeah.
But projecting power costs us almost nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's when we
get into Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right, exactly.
Where we spent trillions.
But we can project power by having an aircraft carrier group in the Persian Gulf, stopping Iran from doing stupid crap.
Yeah.
We can project power by floating through the China Sea so that we stop China from building fake islands down there, so they put our allies like Japan at threat, right?
In Taiwan.
And we can do that without expending any lives, firing any bullets, controlling any countries or despotic dictators, toppling any dictators, or even putting troops on the ground. We can just simply project power. I think Trump's been brilliant with that, in that he has projected power while bringing our troops home.
Yeah.
I'm totally on board with that.
Yeah, and he proposes it in such a way. I disagree with him on too much in the sanctions area.
Sure,
but on the military area, don't engage. We do, and the carrier. By the way, the carrier groups are the best way to keep us from having to have far-flung bases all over the place.
Right.
Because their cost is much less than putting a lot of troops on the ground somewhere.
Right.
And there might be some places for that. But I'm with you. Listen, I believe with Ron Paul on the non-aggression aspect. I mean, I don't think we need to be the aggressors.
There's
I think
a difference
we do too
between
much of
projecting power and
That's right.
Have you ever been in a situation where you have somebody who's causing trouble from somebody, and you walk into a room and the presence of authority simply calms everything down?
Yep.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I've had that happen before, where I'm a tall guy, and I have a commanding presence. And I've walked into rooms before where one person was bothering another, and it just stopped.
Yeah, there's nothing like a carrier group sitting by the Strait of Hormuz.
That's all it is.
I mean, that's a really quick way for Iran to say, okay, we'll back down for a little bit.
Yeah.
Then we pull away. What do? They get aggressive again.
Exactly.
And all we're doing is, we're not engaging.
Yep.
All we're doing is seeing where that point of aggression is on the scale, up or down.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. Okay, so let's move to this and a couple other things before I let you go.
No worries.
So you got the Conway is the right way platform.
Joking around.
President.
Yes.
I love it.
So I was just messing around the other day, and a buddy of mine, I can't remember what it was that he said to me, but he texted me something, and he was like, it inspired me because he was upset with the way the two parties were going. And so I just kind of sat down and wrote a tongue-in-cheek, meant to be funny, but also with sort of 9 points, most of which were serious.
Yeah.
And we sort of just went through the first one. And I said, this is my platform if I was running for president. 1, maintain the strongest, most badass military force in the world, raise their pay, bring them home, end all wars, kick terrorists' ass whenever and wherever they pop up with special forces.
Yeah.
That kind of takes upon Donald Rumsfeld's strategy of
the good side of his strategy. He had a sucky side too.
He had a very sucky side. But the one thing he did good, that did right, there's my grammar again, was he recognized small, mobile, fast, lightning quick forces that can go in and kick the snot out of a terrorist group and then get the hell out.
Yeah.
And I mean, we essentially could have done that in Afghanistan from the get-go. We toppled the Taliban in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it was a special forces group that went in there, scared the ever-loving crap out of them, toppled their power, and then we could have just got out of Dodge.
Yeah, the only good thing we got out of Iraq and Afghanistan is we upped our strategies along this line. I mean, it wasn't worth it, but we did receive it.
Yeah. So, point number 2, we sort of covered this too. Convene criminal justice reform convention. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not pull people together? Why not bring police to the table?
Yeah.
Why not bring former prisoners to the table? Bring some politicians to the table. Bring some people with addicts in their family to the table, and have a criminal justice reform to talk about how do we revisit how we train police officers.
Right.
I saw a story the other day. I don't have all the details of it, but that it's right in the police manual in the George Floyd case, right in the police manual in Minneapolis, how to do the move that guy was doing. Now, I'm not justifying it. I don't think anybody is justified in holding their knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes, especially when they're not fighting anymore.
Right.
But the point is, they did what was in the manual. That's got to change, right? There's other ways to deal with that, but how can we deal? We can't just, you and I are not police officers. I can't project upon the police what they need to do their job. All I can say is, we have a community of people that feel a certain way about this. Can we sit down and talk and figure out how we can fix this so that perception is no longer there, but you're still able to do your job?
By the way, you're exactly right on this approach. Now, think about this for a second. I've been saying out there is no reason under heaven and earth for a policeman to shoot someone in the back with deadly force. I don't see anything on that.
Well, there's a reason it could happen.
No, I'm not. By the way, I'm not going to say that every time that happens, that ultimately when you do the investigation afterwards, you may exonerate the person. But as a standard procedure, it should be no. You will not shoot anyone in the back. You should have that stated. But if you find that you have to, you're going to have to make a case.
There are legitimate cases where individuals have been shot in the back by police officers because they had a weapon in their hand and they were turning and shooting and turning and shooting.
See, but it's a nuance.
It's rare. It's not a nuance. Exactly.
That's right. That's my concern. So, but here's the other thing. So, and this is why I think this sitting down together to talk about a thing is really helpful, because you've got another situation where people are not understanding that some of the stupid things that cops do is just because of the stress in their lives. Yeah. So one of the things I think about, this isn't the final thing, but just as a way to talk about how we sit down together to talk about it, is you've got a situation where these cops do on a daily basis get into tense situations. Now they've got a psychological issue coming up for them that the police departments need to deal with, by the way, with funding, because to mitigate this problem is going to take long leaves of absence to deal with sometimes for guys and gals who are skilled and capable, and you want them on the streets, but they need to be able to release the tension. But see, people on the other side of the table of this issue, sometimes when they see these stupid behaviors, don't have compassion for the cop that deals with the normal stress of the job.
Right.
That's why I think this sort of thing is really helpful.
When you and I are called upon to do our job, we go to a meeting, we talk to people.
Right.
When they're called upon to work, they're dealing with people's worst day.
Right.
Some kid just got run over by a car, head-on collision, and everybody's dead.
Yeah.
Dealing with the grief of the family. Somebody got shot. Somebody got mugged. Domestic violence. Pulled over somebody. Now it's their worst day because they're not going to make that meeting, right? That is the type of situation every time we call upon police to work.
Yeah.
90% of the time, it is a stressful situation in which the person they're dealing with is having the worst day of their life.
Right.
Right. So that's something we have to take into consideration. The other thing is I took a training module. Well, that wasn't really a training module, but they allowed me to be a part of a training module at LMPD in Louisville, where it was a real-time virtual lethal use of force training. And I was given these scenarios where the scenario interacted with me live. Mm-hmm. So there were people on the screen that they would react to what I say.
Yeah.
And I took 4 scenarios where you're supposed to choose, do I need to shoot this person or not? You literally have less than a second to make a decision that involves your life or death or their life or death. In 4 scenarios, I was killed twice. The perpetrator got away after killing someone else because I couldn't stop him in time once. And the last time I killed the perpetrator, but not before he stabbed me with a machete.
Yeah.
So I was injured.
Right.
So all 4 of those times I failed to make the right decision in the right amount of time, because I was having to make a decision to go from firearm in my holster to firing at an individual in a split second.
Yeah.
And we see these 20-second video clips that the media puts out there because they're clickbait, and it gives us zero context. The Jacob Blake story.
Yeah.
I don't know all the details in that. I'm not going to prescribe an opinion to that story yet. But I do know that there were extenuating circumstances, that it was not an innocent situation, and that apparently it looks like he may have been armed. Now,
by the way, he was in the commission of a felony
and he was in the commission of the felony at the time. Now, does that justify the use of force there? I don't know. But the context that we're given by the media does not tell us.
Yeah.
So again, it's a nuanced issue.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. So
yeah.
your idea of getting people sitting down is really important. You talk about well-trained, better paid, highly vetted police force, encourage community policing, which, by the way, we've done a decent job of in this country. Right. There are some communities where we haven't gotten into it.
We're shutting it down in places like in Louisville. They're trying to shut down community policing.
It's crazy.
Community policing, when I say that, I'm talking about if you have a cop that's assigned to a neighborhood and Mrs. Smith's door is ajar at 4:00 in the morning, he goes to check.
Yeah.
He's not trying to invade on Mrs. Smith's life. He's trying to make sure Mrs. Smith is okay. That's community policing.
You know, I felt I didn't,
place.
As a civil libertarian on my side of the issue, I didn't have a problem with some of the stop and frisk policies that they tried to implement in New York City, which Giuliani did very well and then fell apart a little bit. It's a hard thing to do, but that kind of gets into this thing too. I mean, we got to think through what are the approaches that prevent,
right,
but don't take civil liberties away.
Right.
And to be candid, we lean on removing 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment liberties in most of the things that we're doing. And the only way to figure that out, by the way, is this sitting down at the table thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go to your third one.
Tax breaks for regenerative farming. I know that sounds kind of weird and probably a little bit loosey-goosey.
This is how close we are to Thomas Massey, by the way. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. I've gotten really passionate about this lately. Yeah. I don't believe that my SUV is destroying the planet,
right,
in the terms of it's changing the climate. I do believe it's destroying the planet in terms of there's got to be better ways that we can. I'm an all of the above guy. Until we find a better form of fuel, use fossil fuels and use them up.
Yep.
Fine.
I love my big Ford F-250 diesel.
I've got a big SUV, and I do not feel an ounce guilty about it. And I leave my lights on, and I run my air conditioner to 66 at night, and I do not feel a bit guilty because that's the power source we have.
Yeah.
But I do care about the environment, and I also care about healthy food, and I care about farm freedom. I care about farmers being able to farm instead of just being locked out of the business by big industrial conglomerates that have all the tax breaks and all the subsidies from the taxpayers.
Yeah.
And it boxes farmers out from being able to farm. And you could accomplish 2 things with regenerative farming, and that is that we could return the soil back to the way it's supposed to be. Like the whole Midwest of the United States isn't anything like it was 150 years ago, when there were buffalo roaming all over it, peeing and pooping, moving on to the next area, and then eating the grass,
trampling the ground, turning it over.
Turning it over. Yeah. That is regenerative farming, essentially.
Yeah.
And there's a couple places like Polyface Farms in Virginia where they do this, and they move the cows around on a daily basis. You mentioned Massey and his solar-powered chicken tractor, which is a hilarious contraption, but it keeps the foxes away from the chickens, but moves them around on the farm so that they're outside. They're eating bugs and all the kind. They're not being fed some crap diet that the industrial company made.
Right.
They're just eating what chickens would eat.
Right.
And then they taste like chickens are supposed to taste. So I would encourage that if I were president. I would be like, let's get more of that because it's going to restore the land. I heard a very scary statistic the other day that we are 60 harvests away from not being able to use soil. Like that's 60 years from not being able to grow food.
Yeah.
Because of how terrible we're treating the land itself.
Now, the big problem with this is, to be candid, is the government regulation. I think by the way, I would eliminate the USDA.
Yeah, me too.
And reform that whole system to incentives through taxes, as you say, rather than government regulation. I think
subsidies.
And when you drive through Washington, D.C., I talk about this. If you drive through Washington, D.C. down Independence Avenue away from the Capitol, you pass the USDA one USDA complex, by the way,
Right.
in DC, and it's on both sides of the road. You have, and it's huge buildings. It's like a quarter mile of buildings on both sides.
Right.
And that is by far the largest bureaucratic complex in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Physically.
Right.
So that doesn't mean there are larger bureaucracies.
Yeah.
But when you see that, you recognize this is so out of hand.
Yeah.
We do not need the federal government to tell us how to farm. Now, I don't have a problem with states determining how they want to regulate certain things. But if you give incentives to these farmers, I think that's the best
here's
way to go.
Here's an example. Okay, Kentucky is the 5th largest beef cattle producer east of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, no, the 5th largest in America.
Okay.
The largest east of the Mississippi.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Little Kentucky generates an enormous amount of the beef that Americans eat.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the time that those cows are alive, they live on grass. Wonderful, healthy, limestone watered grass, bluegrass, delicious. If you've ever had
the same stuff we make bourbon from.
Same stuff we make bourbon from. Same stuff we make horse races from.
Yeah.
Racing horses from.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the reasons why they don't have a lot of those farmers don't do quote unquote grass fed beef. They send them off to a slaughter farm or to a finishing lot where they're fed a bunch of other stuff, and then they're fattened up, and then they live a stressful life for the last 3 months of their life, and then they're slaughtered. Is because there isn't freedom in the slaughter industry.
Right.
There, Massey talks about this a lot.
The Prime Act.
Right. If you could have a slaughterhouse in Shelbyville, those cattle could stay on that farm until they're ready, and then they go straight down to the Shelbyville slaughterhouse. You'd have businesses being created there. You would have a shorter food supply chain, which protects us in cases like a virus that causes problems with the food supply chain. And you'd have healthier food because it would be less stress throughout the course of its life.
And by the way, this is one of the biggest corporatist things that happens in the United States, one of the worst.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm not advocating for more farming regulation. I'm advocating for less of it because farmers naturally want their land to be usable forever.
Right.
Farmers are natural environmentalists. Yeah. I don't want to tell them how to do what to do.
It's in their best interest.
It's in their best interest. And the ones that aren't going to do it right are going to freaking lose the game.
Yeah.
Right. But right now they have to do it a certain way because they're boxed in by big industrial stuff.
It's really interesting. People think that the big dust storms of the 1920s and 30s were caused because farmers went overboard. No, it was because of government regulation.
Yeah.
It was entirely because
100%. Yeah.
Number 4.
Yeah. Overhaul the federal tax program. I would begin. I don't know how this would work specifically in terms of constitutional amendments. I just kind of threw that together real quick. But I'm for a fair tax. My personal preference is for a consumption tax only. We ran this country for over 100 years without an income tax. The income tax
and in effect consumption taxes, whether it's tariffs or whatever, because we had no income tax.
Exactly. We did levies and tariffs and we did fine. And the vast majority of people were able to just go out and build their own personal economy. And that's what I want to return to.
We're at a place sociologically where people don't get offended by the fact that the federal and state and local governments take their labor away from them.
Right.
All the way through May nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't even know they're working literally till May before it's their own money.
My wife she manages a staff, a pretty large staff, and they're mostly young people. And they were having a meeting the other day. One of her staff members was upset and was apparently going to leave. And my wife said, "You were just hired 3 months ago and the pay was fine when you were hired. Why did that change?" Just trying to figure out what the problem was. And the person said, "You guys lied to me about what I'd be making." And she said, "How so?" She said, "Well, the bonuses, they take so much in taxes and you didn't tell me." And my wife is like, "That's the government, not us.
Yeah.
You're getting exactly what we told you."
Yeah, go to the next business and get your bonus and see what happens.
She didn't say this, but if you're too dumb to figure out what the government is taking from you, but the point was it highlights, especially with young people who don't understand how this works. It was literally deterring this person from doing more work because they were having that work confiscated. They were having that labor confiscated at a higher rate because it was a bonus.
Yeah, no.
Which is absolutely ridiculous. So I would move us towards either a fair or flat tax. The reason I allow for the flat tax is because This is a huge argument, and the bottom line is if we had a flat tax, say everyone paid 10% of their income, period, end of story. Anytime the government came along and tried to take another penny, the whole country would be up in arms.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it would act as a police barrier to them raising our taxes, indiscriminately. But I prefer a consumption tax first.
Yeah.
But I would just say, let's let America decide. Which of these two ways of taxation would you prefer?
Absolutely. Hold on, I'm going to have to edit this out.
No worries.
And I believe in the blunt force instrument of the repealing the 16th Amendment.
Yeah.
I think we got to do it.
Yeah.
You have to. That's the only way we can hold government accountable.
Right.
I mean, even you got to do both, by the way.
Yeah.
So anyway, so what's the next on your list?
Number 5 was, establish a bottom line basic healthcare system to provide for basic emergency healthcare for those who can't provide it for themselves.
Listen, in my opinion, we got to get rid of all federal government healthcare plans. Yeah. Now, we might consider doing the DOD plan because that's actually like doing it in a business.
Right.
We may possibly keep the VA, but I just don't see.
I would redesign the VA. The military.
Just make it wide open. Yeah. Just make it like any insurance plan rather than
military
make it not an HMO, but a PPP.
Yeah. Military should be able to go to the nearest doctor that best suits their needs.
Yeah.
And the government should deal with it and just have to suck it up.
But this is tough for people. I'd get rid of Medicare.
Yeah. I would scrap those programs.
Medicaid to the states.
Yeah. I would scrap those programs and I would create a basic bottom line that you can be eligible for if you can't acquire it yourself through a number of circumstances. It would be a high quality. It would be a high bar.
Yeah.
You would have to be indigent. You would have to be, there had to be some mitigating challenge that you couldn't go out and work and do all of this. And that's part of a broader healthcare plan that I've put out multiple times and mentioned to a lot of different politicians that would include, dollar for dollar tax breaks for corporations and individuals for every dollar they spend on healthcare.
Yep.
Meaning if a company takes part of whatever profit they make and they put it into healthcare for their employees, that's tax free.
No, absolutely.
So that's kind of
free market healthcare. We got to get there.
100%.
Number 6 we covered. We talked about secure borders and what to do. So I think we're good there. So number 7.
I would abolish the federal Department of Education, turn all of education over to the states, and I would basically I'd phase it out over time, but whatever money is currently going into the federal Department of Education, I would put to the states in the form of block grants on the condition that they offer school choice.
Yeah.
That parents that your tax dollars be able to follow you wherever you want to put your kid in school.
That's right. I mean, this would be such a no-brainer. By the way, Trump's making inroads into the black vote. This is another way he's making it because I remember when I was working in Indiana in politics, there was a legislator there, Bill Crawford. He's since passed away, but he was like a socialist. Okay.
Right.
But he was radical on school choice.
Right.
And that cuts every political barrier through, particularly in the inner cities. By the way, I maintain the last bastion of pure Jim Crow racism is inner city public schools.
100%. Yeah. And if you talk to the parents in those areas, they want to get their kids out of that situation because everybody knows education is the solution to the cycle of poverty.
Yeah.
And those parents need to have a choice of putting their kids wherever, and their tax dollars need to follow that child. So if they want to put them in a private school or a charter school or whatever that does better for that child, their tax dollars should follow them to it. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. 100%.
Absolutely. By the way, homeschoolers get worried about it because if that money gets given to them, they concern themselves with the government regulation that might come upon them. That is a key factor, but I think it can be mitigated, but I totally get that concern.
And number 8 is the opportunity zones that that Senator Tim Scott and Senator Rand Paul have put in place. This is not, in some ways, it could be criticized as not being free market in a way because it's giving tax breaks to certain geographical areas that are not given to others. But then we go back to that recognition. We're less than a lifetime away from people in our communities who weren't able to eat at the same restaurants that we ate at. We're less than 40 years away from redlining.
Yeah.
That was literally keeping African Americans from being able to buy houses in certain communities. And that is still that the poverty that was brought upon, the lack of wealth that was brought upon as from those institutionally racist ideas of the 1960s and 70s still exist. So the way you deal with that is injecting free market into those areas and say to businesses, if you want to start a business in this area, provide jobs, provide access to healthier foods or whatever, provide access to products, for these communities, we're going to give you a tax break. That's an opportunity.
It's like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, by the way,
right,
which should never have had to have passed, but had to pass.
Right.
Now, it's been bastardized since in ways that have gone way overboard, but we were trying to correct a wrong, at least this is my personal opinion, and we do have to fix these inner cities.
Yeah.
The Democrats that are running these cities will never do it. We can see it's getting even worse.
I heard somebody say the other day, they were like, we can spend trillions of dollars building schools, bridges, and infrastructure in third world countries that we've injected our military into, but we can't fix our inner cities.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, your ninth one, I think, is the key.
This is the key.
This is the key to the whole thing.
Ban man buns and dudes wearing skinny jeans.
Yeah, I totally
I'm done
agree
with
you. Yeah.
Man buns was the worst thing that ever came along, and I'm 100% done with it. So I'm banning them. You're going to be arrested, thrown in jail. Period. No question, no trial. Going to jail if you wear a man bun.
What was the Tom Cruise movie when he got connected with the samurai?
Yeah, the name of it.
Anyway,
totally,
so the guy had the man bun cut off. No, those man buns I'll support because that comes with something much different.
Yeah.
But man buns.
And my slogan is something that Sasquatch used to say on my radio show: "Poncho up, son. We're done here." So if I get all these things done, I'm going to spend the rest of my time in the Oval Office.
So we're going to promote this hashtag Conway Sasquatch 2020.
All right, it works for me.
No, listen. You know what the real problem with man buns is?
What's that?
The reason for people to get man buns.
Right.
This is a cultural phenomenon that comes up through something pretty trashy in society, if you ask me. I don't know what motivates someone to do that.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of people that do it, and a lot of girls that I guess think it's good, but no man buns in Leland Conway's America. So I did all these just to make the point that, again, politics is nuanced.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things in here that probably don't fit in with the standard Republican platform.
Yeah.
They definitely don't fit in with what the Democrats give lip service to, but I think it's the way a lot of Americans think.
So you talked earlier, as we get towards the closing here, you talked about what Trump's going to do is a new way to connect with people. Because I think a lot of what you've laid out is the kind of nuance to it that people hadn't thought through before is similar to the way that Trump kind of came in and totally radically transformed the way that we're thinking about how to approach the electorate.
Right.
So what do you see? So you said Trump has set this up. What are we looking at in the future? What are you thinking about there?
Well, I see an opening here. Trump did it, but he did it not quite right. Like all pioneers, I guess. He still has this part of what made him so relatable was the fact that celebrity is so important to him. And I think that's part of why he has almost no ability to admit when he's wrong and almost no ability to change direction sometimes. And I would say that there's an opportunity here for somebody to recognize what Trump has done really well, and that is to, again, speak like normal people speak and connect with them on sort of this almost pragmatic. It's a pragmatism in the approach. Because here's the thing, as a libertarian, I know I'm not going to get everything that I want, and I'm not going to win every argument. What I am willing to do is get some of what I want by sitting down and talking to the other side. Mm-hmm. That's probably one thing that's missing in Trump is that I think early on he tried to sit down with the other side and make deals, and they sort of refused. And now he's sort of gone way to the other side of that.
Right.
I think maybe the next person that comes in that can connect with the electorate that way, maybe they're going to be a little more pragmatic and say, let's get a conversation going here. There's things we can remember back when Tip O'Neill was Speaker of the House and President Reagan
they had beers together.
They had beers together, and they got deals
and they told
done.
stories.
Yeah.
They shared they had a common background in a way,
right?
And they shared stories, and they hated one another politically in many ways, but they knew that there was something important.
And they got deals done because going back to bring this full circle to our conversation at the beginning, when I said part of getting along is finding that thing you can advocate for that you both agree on. That's what they were able to do in the 1980s and early 1990s. They could find that thing they both agreed on while they disagreed on everything else, and then advance the ball on that one thing. And that's what I'm hoping the next politician that connects with the electorate can do that. Yeah. If that makes sense.
No, I agree. And in fact, one of the concerns with getting there is the Democrat Party. I mean, I think the Republican Party can be very corrupt in a lot of ways. It really concerns me. but the Democrat Party's lost right now. It's not the JFK Party. Tip O'Neill came from the JFK Party, that were still patriots, that still believed in America. They were getting a little radicalized to the left by the time he came around, but they still had this sense of what America was. And that's why, Reagan could trade off the military spending he needed to defend the country with dealing with the other things that Democrats wanted at the time. But they did it.
Yeah.
And it can be done.
Yeah, it can. And I think the bottom line is that we need, like if you look at the way the two parties are set up right now, again, it's red team, blue team. Yeah. There has to be a recognition that most Americans simply don't think that dichotomous.
Yeah.
We speak it because we think we're supposed to speak it. But in reality, it's like I talk to a lot of my liberal friends. They're actually conservatives in their personal life.
Oh, yeah, totally.
When you start talking about personal responsibility.
By the way, this problem is with the leadership in the parties, FYI. It's not with the average voter.
Exactly.
Yeah, by and large.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll see maybe – I'm not optimistic, but I'd like to see kind of a return to dialogue. That's the biggest thing that disappoints me is that it feels like nobody can talk anymore.
Yeah.
Without getting angry with each other.
So what we just went through over the last hour or so.
Yeah.
Is what happens when you get two radio guys together.
Yeah, right? Long-winded?
Yeah.
Either that or two Baptist preachers. It's going to be an hour or so.
A little bit of both, I guess.
Exactly.
Well, so let me know before we finish.
Phone's ringing.
Before we finish this, by the way, and so we're doing this for those who are just catching the podcast in me and my wife's store in Woodland Park, Colorado, Fit Nutrition Depot. So a little bit, but it makes it fun.
Yep.
I mean, we've got a nice environment here, but so tell people what they need to know. Hopefully we can trade podcasts here, by the way. I'd love to be on yours as well.
We're going to have you on.
Oh, that'd be great. So tell people about yours and what they need to know to get a hold of you. And
so it's thedisruptionzone.com, www.thedisruptionzone.com. We're on
with the in it.
Yeah, it's
the Disruption Zone.
Yeah, The Disruption Zone. We're on iHeartRadio. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and I think we're on SoundCloud and there's one other one. But anyway, anywhere podcasts are found.
I'm not paying for the SoundCloud thing.
Yeah, right.
I might want to. I think you need to.
I've got it because of the RSS feed. But anyway, you can throw that up there. You can go to thedisruptionzone.com. And, of course, we're on Twitter. It's at Leland Show. And on Instagram, at Great Lelondo. So,
awesome. Well, I'm going to tell you, Leland, you're a great friend.
You too.
Blast having you on the podcast.
Yeah,
We've been meaning to do this for a little while. It just hadn't worked out. But thanks for coming on the Against Nice podcast.
And I can't wait to get you on mine. So.
All right. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks,
man. Okay, good. Thank you for joining us today on the Against Nice podcast. Please be sure to go to our website, www.politicsisn'tnice.com. You can sign up for our email list there just at the top right of the web page. And make sure to follow us on iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher or even the iHeartRadio app. And give us a 5-star rating and let people know what you think about our podcast. Again, www.politicsisn'tnice.com. Join our email list at the top right hand of the page there and follow us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or iHeartRadio. Thanks for joining the show today. We'll be back soon.